The air inside the grand hall of the Silver Moon Pack was thick enough to choke on. It smelled of roasted wild boar, sweet honey wine, and the heavy, musky scent of wealthy werewolves. To anyone else, it might have smelled like a celebration. To Alara, it smelled like fear. Alara adjusted the heavy silver tray resting on her shoulder. Her arms burned. She had been carrying drinks back and forth from the kitchens for 5 hours without a break. The tray was loaded with crystal goblets filled to the brim with dark red wine. One slip, one spilled drop, and she wouldn't just be yelled at. She would be punished. "Move, rat!" A burly beta guard grunted, shoving past her near the entrance. Alara stumbled, her heart leaping into her throat. She bit her lip, tasting iron, and steadied the tray just in time. The wine sloshed dangerously near the rim, but didn't spill. She kept her head down, staring at the polished marble floor. That was the first rule of being an Omega. Never look up. Never look an Alpha in the eye. "I'm sorry, sir," she whispered, her voice rough from disuse. The guard didn't even look back. He just laughed and joined his friends at a long wooden table piled high with food. Alara was invisible. That was her superpower, or at least that was what she told herself to survive. She was 19 years old, but she looked much younger. Her gray wool dress was 3 sizes too big, hanging off her thin frame like a sack. It was scratchy and smelled of the harsh lye soap she used to scrub the packhouse floors. Her brown hair was hidden under a rough linen cap, and she wore no shoes. The marble floor was freezing against her bare soles. But she had learned long ago to ignore the cold. Tonight was the royal feast. It was the most important night of the year. Every alpha, beta, and high-ranking wolf from the neighboring territories had come to the Silver Moon Pack. They were here to eat, drink, and brag about their strength. But mostly, they were here for him. Alara risked a tiny glance upward as she moved toward the far side of the room. At the very front of the hall, on a raised platform, sat the Alpha King, King Kalen. Even sitting down, he was terrifying. He was huge, with broad shoulders that strained against his black, military-style jacket. He didn't wear gold or silk like the other alphas. He wore black leather and dark fur. His hair was the color of a raven's wing, falling messily over his forehead. While the rest of the hall was loud, filled with booming laughter, shouting, and the clinking of plates, the king was silent. He sat on his velvet throne like a statue carved from darkness. He held a goblet of wine in one large hand. But he wasn't drinking, he was watching. His eyes were dark, almost black, scanning the room with a look of utter boredom and dangerous lethargy. Rumors said King Kalen had killed a rogue wolf with his bare hands when he was only 12. They said he had no heart, that he was cursed by the moon goddess to never find a mate. That was why he was so cold. That was why he was so cruel. Alara quickly looked back down at her feet. Looking at the king was a death wish. She just needed to deliver these drinks to table 4, and then she could sneak back to the kitchen for a scrap of bread. Her stomach gave a painful twist. She hadn't eaten since yesterday morning. She navigated through the maze of tables. The noise was deafening. A group of female wolves near the center were laughing loudly. They were beautiful, with glossy hair and expensive silk dresses that hugged their curves. They smelled like expensive perfume, vanilla, rose, and jasmine. In the center of this group sat Lady Sybil. Sybil was the daughter of the Silver Moon Alpha. She was stunning, with long blonde hair and sharp blue eyes. She was wearing a dress made of red silk that cost more than Alara's life was worth. But Alara knew the truth about Sybil. Sybil was mean. She enjoyed pain. Last week, Sybil had ordered Alara to iron her silk sheets. When Alara finished, Sybil claimed there was a wrinkle and poured hot tea on Alara's hand as punishment. The burn was still healing under Alara's sleeve, throbbing with every beat of her heart. Alara tried to give Sybil's table a wide berth. She hugged the wall, trying to blend into the shadows. "He hasn't looked at me once," Sybil complained loudly to her friends. She slammed her fork down. "I spent 4 hours getting ready. I'm wearing the color he likes. Why is he just staring at the wall?" "Maybe he's shy, Lady Sybil," one of her friends giggled nervously. "The Alpha King is not shy," Sybil snapped. Her pretty face twisted into an ugly scowl. "He's looking for a queen, and there is no one in this room better than me. I am a purebred alpha female." Sybil took a large gulp of wine and looked around the room, her eyes narrowing. She was bored. She was angry that the king wasn't paying attention to her. She needed something to take her frustration out on. She needed a target. Alara felt the shift in the air before she saw it. It was an instinct, a warning bell ringing in her mind. "Run," her inner wolf whispered. But her inner wolf was weak, barely a ghost. Alara couldn't run. She was holding the tray. As Alara passed behind Sybil's chair, trying to be as quiet as a mouse, Sybil turned. Their eyes met. Sybil's blue eyes sparkled with malice. A cruel smile slowly spread across her red lips. "Oh, look," Sybil said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "The rat is out of its hole." Alara froze. "I am just serving the drinks, my lady," she whispered, bowing her head. "Did I say you could speak?" Sybil asked. The table went quiet. Sybil's friends watched with eager grins. They knew this game. "No, my lady," Alara breathed. "You're ruining my appetite," Sybil said, leaning back in her chair. "You smell like dirt and wet dog. It's disgusting. How can the king enjoy his meal with filth like you walking around?" Alara gripped the tray tighter. Her knuckles turned white. "Just walk away," she told herself. "Don't react. If you don't react, she gets bored." Alara took a step forward, trying to pass. That was when Sybil moved. It was subtle. As Alara stepped past, Sybil stretched out her leg. Her sharp stiletto heel hooked around Alara's ankle. It happened in slow motion. Alara felt her foot catch. She tried to catch her balance, but the tray was too heavy. Gravity took over. "Ah!" Alara gasped. She pitched forward. The heavy silver tray left her hands. Crash! The sound was like a gunshot in the crowded hall. The tray hit the stone floor with a deafening clang. Crystal goblets shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces. Dark red wine exploded outward like a tidal wave. It splashed everywhere. It soaked the hem of Sybil's red dress. It splashed onto the polished boots of the Alpha sitting nearby. But mostly, it covered Alara. She landed hard on her hands and knees, right in the middle of the broken glass. A sharp pain shot through her palm as a shard of crystal sliced her skin. Warm blood mixed with the cold wine on the floor. The music stopped. The laughter died. In a heartbeat, the grand hall went from a roar of noise to a terrifying silence. 300 wolves turned to look. Alara lay there, trembling. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. She squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for the blow, waiting for the shouting. "My dress!" Sybil shrieked. She stood up, pointing a manicured finger at the stain on her hem. "You clumsy idiot! You ruined my dress. Do you know how much this cost?" Alara scrambled to her knees, keeping her head bowed low. She ignored the glass cutting into her skin. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Lady Sybil. I didn't mean to. I slipped." "You didn't slip," Sybil hissed, stepping closer. She loomed over Alara. "You did this on purpose. You're jealous because you're nothing but a servant, and I am going to be queen. No, never, I swear, Alara cried, her voice shaking. Look at her, Sybil announced to the room, raising her voice so everyone could hear. She wanted an audience. She wanted the king to see how she handled the servants. She wanted to look powerful. Look at this mess. She's pathetic. The crowd began to murmur. They weren't sympathetic. In the wolf world, weakness was a sin. They looked at Alara with disgust. She should be thrown in the dungeon, a man shouted from the back. Make her lick it up. Another woman laughed cruel. Alara felt tears burning in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Crying made it worse. Sybil looked up toward the dais, checking to see if the king was watching. He was. King Kalen was leaning forward slightly, his dark eyes fixed on the scene. His expression was unreadable. Sybil took this as a sign of approval. She thought he was waiting for her to punish the girl. Sybil looked back down at Alara, a wicked idea forming in her mind. Beating the girl was too boring. Sybil wanted to humiliate her. She wanted to make Alara a joke, so everyone would laugh and forget the awkward silence. You know, Sybil said, her voice turning smooth and dangerous. You ruined the entertainment, rat. The musicians stopped playing because of your clumsiness. I'm sorry, Alara repeated, her voice a broken whisper. Sorry isn't enough, Sybil sneered. She tapped her chin, pretending to think. Since you ruined the floor and stopped the music, you should replace the entertainment. Yes, that seems fair. Alara looked up, confused. My lady? Sybil grinned, revealing white teeth that looked too sharp. Get up. Alara struggled to her feet. Her dress was soaked with wine, sticking to her legs. Blood dripped from her hand. She looked small and frail, standing next to the glowing, healthy Sybil. The king looks bored, Sybil declared, and we can't have a bored king. So, you are going to entertain us. Sybil pointed a finger at the center of the room, where the floor was clear. Dance for me, Omega, Sybil commanded. The command hung in the air. A few people chuckled nervously. Alara's breath hitched. What? Are you deaf as well as stupid? Sybil stepped closer, her voice dropping to a growl. I said, dance. You wanted attention, right? You wanted to make a scene? Well, here is your chance. Dance for the pack. Make us laugh. Alara's stomach dropped. This was a nightmare. She didn't know how to dance. Not like the high-born ladies with their ballroom lessons. She was a servant. She scrubbed floors. If she tried to dance, she would look ridiculous. They would laugh at her until she wished she was dead. I can't, Alara whispered. Please, my lady, I will clean the floor. I will work extra shifts. Please don't make me. Sybil's face hardened. She grabbed Alara's chin, digging her nails in. You don't have a choice. You are an Omega. You do what you are told. Or, Sybil leaned in close, her voice a venomous whisper only Alara could hear. Or, I will tell my father to have you banished. And a lone Omega, without a pack, doesn't survive one night in the woods. Banishment. It was a death sentence. Alara pulled back, her eyes wide with terror. She looked around the room, desperate for help. She looked at the guards. They were smirking. She looked at the other servants. They had their heads down, terrified that they would be next. Finally, her eyes drifted to the raised platform, to the king. King Kalen hadn't moved. He was still watching. His face was a mask of stone. He wasn't laughing, but he wasn't helping either. He was just observing, like a predator watching a mouse struggle in a trap. There was no help coming. Well, Sybil shouted, throwing her arms out. "We are waiting! Dance, dance, dance!" Sybil's friends started to chant. Soon, others joined in. It became a rhythm. They clapped their hands and stomped their feet. It wasn't a cheer. It was a mockery. They wanted to see the poor, dirty girl flop around like a fish. They wanted to see her fall again. Alara stood alone in the center of the circle. The spotlight of attention burned her skin. She felt dizzy. The smell of the spilled wine was overpowering. She closed her eyes. Dance, she thought. They want to dance. A memory surfaced from the deep recesses of her mind. It was a memory from before the fire, before her parents died, before she became a slave. She was 4 years old. Her mother was holding her hands in a sunlit meadow. "Listen to the earth, Alara," her mother had said. "The moon goddess gave us a rhythm. It isn't in the music. It is in your blood. Close your eyes and find the heartbeat of the world." Alara took a shaky breath. The chanting of the crowd, "Dance, dance," started to fade into the background. She focused on her own heartbeat. Thump, 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 thump. It was fast, terrified. But she forced it to slow down. She forced herself to breathe. If she was going to do this, she wasn't going to flop around like a clown. She had lost her freedom, her family, and her dignity. But she still had one thing left. She had her soul. Alara lifted her chin. She didn't look at Sybil. She didn't look at the king. She looked up at the high glass ceiling, where the full moon was shining down. Slowly, she raised her arms. Her dirty, oversized sleeves slipped down, revealing her thin, pale arms. She didn't move to the jeering of the crowd. She moved to the silence inside her head. She took the first step. It wasn't a clumsy stumble. It was a slide. Her bare foot, wet with wine, glided over the marble. She pointed her toe. She arched her back. The movement was strange. It wasn't a party dance. It was ancient. It was a dance of sorrow, of pleading to the moon. She spun. Once, twice. Her dress, which had looked like a potato sack, suddenly flared out. The heavy wool swirled around her legs. For a second, she didn't look like a servant. She looked like a shadow caught in a whirlwind. She began to hum. It was a low, haunting sound, vibrating in her throat. The clapping from the crowd faltered. A few people stopped laughing. Alara spun again, faster this time. She forgot the pain in her hand. She forgot the hunger in her stomach. The movement fed her. It felt like waking up after a long, long sleep. Deep inside her chest, something clicked. A lock that had been rusted shut for years suddenly snapped open. Warmth flooded her veins. It started in her toes and rushed up to her heart. It wasn't just adrenaline. It felt like power. As she danced, she didn't notice the atmosphere in the room changing. She didn't notice that the candles on the tables flickered wildly, as if a wind had blown through the closed hall. She didn't notice that the wine she had spilled on the floor was starting to steam. And she certainly didn't notice the Alpha King. Kalen had dropped his hand. The goblet he was holding cracked. The dark liquid leaked over his fingers, but he didn't flinch. He leaned forward in his throne, his body tense as a bowstring, his nostrils flared, inhaling sharply. The scent, it hit him like a physical blow. Underneath the smell of roasted meat and cheap perfume, there was something else. Something fresh, something that smelled like ozone, like the air right before a lightning strike, mixed with the sweet, wild scent of night-blooming jasmine. It was the most intoxicating thing he had ever smelled in his life, and it was coming from the girl in the gray rags. Alara was no longer in the grand hall. In her mind, she was miles away, She was back in the clearing of the whispering woods, where the grass was soft and the moonlight didn't judge her. Her body moved on instinct. At first, her muscles were stiff. She had spent the last 10 years scrubbing floors on her hands and knees, carrying heavy loads, and curling into a ball to protect herself from kicks. Her body was used to pain, not grace. But as she hummed that low, vibrating melody, something ancient woke up in her blood. She extended her arm, her fingers rippling like water. She took a step back, dragging her toe across the floor in a perfect arc. The hem of her oversized gray dress, which usually looked like a sack of potatoes, caught the air. As she spun, the fabric twisted around her legs. It didn't look like rags anymore. In the motion, it looked like a storm cloud swirling around a mountain. The jeering from the crowd began to falter. "Look at her," one of Sybil's friends snickered, though the laugh sounded forced. "She looks like a dying bird." "Dance, rat," another shouted. But the chants didn't have the same energy as before. They were losing their rhythm. Ilara ignored them. She spun faster. The world became a blur of colors, the red of the carpets, the gold of the chandeliers, the dark wood of the tables. She closed her eyes tight. "Feel the ground," her mother's voice whispered in her memory. "You are not above the earth. You are part of it." Ilara stomped her foot. Boom! It wasn't a loud noise, but it vibrated through the floorboards. It was a heavy, rhythmic stomp that perfectly matched the beat of the drums in her head. Boom, swish, turn. Boom, swish, turn. The movement was hypnotic. It wasn't the polite, stiff dancing the high-born wolves did at their balls. This was raw. It was wild. It was the kind of dance wolves did around a fire before a hunt. It spoke of hunger, of cold nights, and of a deep, aching loneliness. The laughter in the hall died completely. Lady Sybil's smile began to slip. She sat up straighter, her blue eyes narrowing. This wasn't going to plan. Ilara was supposed to trip. She was supposed to cry. She was supposed to look pathetic so that Sybil could laugh and look superior. But Ilara didn't look pathetic. She looked tragic and beautiful. Sybil felt a cold knot of jealousy tighten in her stomach. "Why are you all quiet?" she snapped at the people at her table. "Laugh! Look at her! She's ridiculous!" Her friends exchanged uneasy glances. They tried to chuckle, but it came out as nervous coughing. They couldn't look away from the girl in the center of the room. Ilara's humming grew louder. It wasn't a song with words. It was a melody of pure emotion. It sounded like the wind howling through a canyon. It was a sound of mourning. Without realizing it, the guests stopped eating. Forks hovered halfway to mouths. Wine glasses were lowered to the tables. Even the servers near the kitchen doors stopped working to watch. The air in the room grew heavy. The temperature seemed to drop, making the candles flicker. The shadows in the corners of the room stretched out, reaching toward Ilara as if they wanted to dance with her. Ilara felt the shift. The fear that had been gripping her heart vanished. In its place came a strange, burning heat. It started in her chest, right where her heart beat against her ribs. It felt like she had swallowed a star. She didn't know what was happening. She only knew that for the first time in years, she didn't feel weak. She felt strong. She threw her head back, exposing her pale neck. Her dirty cap slipped off her head and fell to the floor. Her hair, which she usually kept hidden in a tight bun, uncoiled. It tumbled down her back in a thick, wavy cascade of chestnut brown. It caught the light of the chandeliers, shimmering with hidden hints of copper. She spun again, arms wide, embracing the empty space. Sybil slammed her hand on the table. The sound echoed in the silent hall. "Enough!" she shrieked. "Stop it! You look foolish. Get back to the kitchen." But Alara didn't hear her. She was too deep in the trance. She was dancing for the moon goddess now. King Kalen had not moved a muscle. To the rest of the room, he looked calm. But inside, a war was raging. His wolf, a beast of pure shadow and power that usually slept deep within him, was clawing at the walls of his mind. It was roaring. "Mate," the beast growled. "Mine." Kalen's hands gripped the arms of his velvet throne so hard that the wood groaned. The scent was driving him mad. It was rolling off the girl in waves, winter rain, and wildflowers. It was the scent of home. It was the scent of safety. He watched her hair fall loose. He watched the way her body moved, fluid, like water, yet strong, like the roots of a tree. And then he saw it. At first, he thought it was a trick of the light. As Alara spun, a faint shimmer appeared around her skin. It looked like dust motes dancing in a sunbeam. But the room was dark, lit only by candles. The shimmer grew brighter. "What is that?" A beta whispered at a nearby table. Is she glowing?" Alara felt the heat in her chest expand. It traveled down her arms to her fingertips. It traveled down her legs to her toes. It was a pleasant heat, like standing near a bonfire on a snowy night. She brought her hands together above her head and then swept them down slowly, as if she were parting a curtain. As her hands moved, the air rippled. A visible wave of golden light trailed from her fingertips. It wasn't the pale yellow of a candle. It was gold. Deep, rich, metallic gold. The color of a crown, the color of the sun at high noon. Gasps erupted around the room. Chairs scraped against the stone floor as people stood up to get a better look. In the world of wolves, auras were rare. Most wolves had no visible aura. Betas had a faint gray mist if they were angry. Alphas had red or orange flares when they commanded their pack. But gold? Gold was a legend. Gold was the mark of the royals. It was the mark of a wolf, directly blessed by the moon goddess. It signified power that could command nations. And it was pouring out of an Omega servant girl. The light swirled around Alara, forming a cocoon. It was blindingly beautiful. It lit up her ragged dress, making the gray wool look like silver. It illuminated her face, washing away the dirt and the exhaustion. She looked ethereal. She looked like a goddess who had fallen to earth. Lady Sybil stood up, her face pale with shock and horror. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "That's a trick. It's a magic trick. She's a witch." "Sit down, Sybil," her father, the Silver Moon Alpha, hissed, grabbing her arm. He was staring at Alara with wide, terrified eyes. He knew what that light meant. Everyone did. Alara was oblivious to the panic she was causing. She was reaching the climax of her dance. The music in her head was swelling to a crescendo. The heat inside her was demanding to be released. She spun one last time, faster than humanly possible. The golden light flared out, expanding into a massive ring of energy. Whoosh! A pulse of pure power swept through the hall. It blew out half the candles. It made the banners on the walls flap wildly. It knocked the wine glasses off the tables near the front. Crash, crash, crash. Glass shattered everywhere. Alara came to a sudden stop. She landed in a low bow, one knee on the floor, her head lowered, her arms spread wide. The golden aura didn't disappear. It settled around her like a glowing cloak, pulsing gently with the rhythm of her breathing. The silence that followed was absolute. No one moved, no one breathed. The only sound was the crackle of the fireplace and the thumping of 300 hearts. Up on the dais, the king's control snapped. The goblet in Kalen's hand exploded. He didn't just drop it, his grip crushed the thick crystal into dust. Dark wine coated his hand like blood, dripping onto the floor. Kalen didn't notice the cut on his hand. He didn't feel the pain. His eyes were locked on the girl bowing in the center of the room. His eyes, usually a dark, endless black, began to change. The black retreated, replaced by a glowing, molten gold that matched the light surrounding Alara. He stood up. The movement was abrupt and aggressive. The heavy throne chair was shoved backward with a loud screech. Every wolf in the room froze. When the Alpha King stood, the world stopped. Kalen's chest heaved. He took a deep breath, inhaling that intoxicating scent of wildflowers. It was stronger now, spiced with the ozone smell of her magic. His wolf was howling in triumph. Found her. She is here. Alara, panting from the exertion, slowly opened her eyes. She saw the golden light fading on her skin and frowned in confusion. Then she realized the room was dead silent. Fear came rushing back. What did I do? She thought frantically. Did I break something? Did I do it wrong? She slowly lifted her head, terrified of what she would see. She didn't see Sybil laughing. She didn't see the crowd jeering. She saw 300 people staring at her with their mouths open. And then she looked past them. Up to the dais. She locked eyes with King Kalen. He was standing at the edge of the platform, looking down at her. He looked like a giant. His golden eyes burned into her soul. He looked furious, intense, and terrifyingly focused. Alara's heart stopped. He's going to kill me, she thought. I used magic. Omegas aren't allowed to use magic. He's going to execute me right here. She wanted to run, but her legs wouldn't move. The golden gaze of the Alpha King held her pinned to the spot, like a butterfly trapped in amber. But Kalen wasn't thinking about execution. He was thinking that for the first time in 100 years, his heart was beating. He took the first step down the stairs. The silence in the grand hall was shattered by a screech. "What are you doing?" Lady Sybil screamed. Her voice was high and panicked. She pointed a trembling finger at Alara. "Why did you stop? Who gave you permission to use cheap magic tricks?" Sybil looked around the room, desperate to regain control. She saw the awed faces of the guests. She saw the fear in her father's eyes. She realized, with a sinking feeling, that Alara had stolen the show. The servant girl was the center of attention, and Sybil was invisible. Jealousy, hot and ugly, clawed at Sybil's throat. She couldn't let this happen. "Guards!" Sybil shouted. "Seize her! She's a witch!" She attacked the guests with sorcery. 2 beta guards near the wall hesitated. They looked at Sybil, then they looked at the glowing girl on the floor. They didn't know what to do. "I said seize her!" Sybil stomped her foot. She marched toward Alara, her red dress swishing aggressively. "If the guards won't do it, I will. Get up, you filth!" Alara flinched. The golden light around her was fading, leaving her feeling cold and exposed. She scrambled backward on her hands and knees, trying to get away from Sybil. The glass shards on the floor cut her palms again, but she was too scared to feel it. "This is it," Alara thought. "I'm going to die." Sybil raised her hand to strike Alara. Silence. The word wasn't shouted. It was growled. It vibrated through the stone floor like an earthquake. It shook the glass in the window frames. It hit every wolf in the room, right in the chest, forcing the air from their lungs. Sybil froze mid-step. Her hand hovered in the air, trembling. At the top of the stairs, King Kalen began to move. He didn't rush. He didn't run. He walked with the slow, terrifying grace of a predator who knows he is at the top of the food chain. Thud. His heavy military boots hit the first step. Thud. The second step, The sound echoed in the deadly quiet room. Every eye was fixed on him. The crowd parted like the Red Sea. Powerful alphas who usually strutted around with their chests puffed out were now scrambling to get out of his way. They lowered their heads, baring their necks in submission. No one dared to look him in the eye. Kalen walked straight down the center aisle. He didn't look left. He didn't look right. His golden eyes were locked on one thing: the trembling girl on the floor. As he passed Sybil, she tried to speak. She put on her most charming smile, though her lips were quivering. "Your Majesty," Sybil purred, stepping into his path. "I am so sorry about this disturbance. This servant is broken. I was just about to teach her a lesson for ruining your—" Kalen didn't stop. He didn't even blink. He walked right past her as if she were a piece of furniture. The wind from his passing cloak whipped Sybil's hair into her face. Sybil stood there, stunned. Her mouth hung open. She had been ignored. Completely, utterly ignored. Her face turned a bright, humiliated red. Kalen reached the center of the circle. He stopped in front of Alara. Alara was shaking so hard her teeth chattered. She stared at his boots, heavy, black, encased in leather. She squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for the kick. She expected him to be angry that an Omega had dared to use magic in his presence. She heard the rustle of fabric. Then she heard a soft thud. The room gasped. A collective intake of breath swept through the hall. Alara opened one eye. The king was not kicking her. He was kneeling. The Alpha King, the most feared wolf in the continent, the man who never bowed to anyone, was down on one knee in the middle of spilled wine and broken glass. He didn't care about the mess. He didn't care about his expensive trousers. He reached out a hand. His hand was large, scarred, and powerful, but his touch was incredibly gentle. He took Alara's chin between his thumb and forefinger and tilted her face up. Alara found herself staring into eyes of molten gold. They weren't cold anymore. They were burning with an intensity that made her dizzy. There was no anger in them. There was only hunger and awe. "What is your name?" His voice was a low rumble, intimate and soft, meant only for her. Alara," she whispered. "Alara," he repeated. The way he said her name made it sound like a prayer. He looked down at her hand, where the blood was dripping from the cut. His jaw tightened. A flash of rage crossed his face, but he pushed it down. He reached out and gently took her bleeding hand in his. He brought it to his lips. He kissed the bloody palm, right over the cut. Alara's breath hitched. A jolt of electricity shot up her arm. The pain vanished instantly, replaced by a soothing, tingling sensation. Kalen looked up, his eyes locking with hers. He ignored the hundreds of people watching. He ignored the shock of the pack. "You have a gift, Alara," he said, his voice gaining volume so the room could hear him. But it was wasted here. He released her hand and stood up, towering over her again. But this time, he didn't feel like a threat. He felt like a shield. He looked around the room, his gaze hardening as it landed on the faces of the people who had laughed at her. "You do not dance for them," Kalen growled, his voice dark and possessive. "From this moment on, you only dance for me." The declaration hung in the air, heavy and absolute. For a moment, no one spoke. Then the whispers started. They were like the buzzing of angry bees. What does he mean? Did he just kiss her hand? She's an Omega. She's a servant. Lady Sybil couldn't take it anymore. She snapped. She pushed past her father and marched into the center of the circle, stopping just a few feet from the king. "Your Majesty," Sybil cried out, her voice shrill. "You cannot be serious. Look at her. She is a dirty, wolfless Omega. She is beneath you. She is beneath us." Kaelin slowly turned his head to look at Sybil. The golden light in his eyes flared, turning almost red. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. "Careful," Kaelin warned, his voice sounding like grinding stones. "I am just trying to save you from embarrassment," Sybil argued, desperate. "I am the daughter of the Alpha. I am a purebred. I am the one you should be looking at. Not this rat." Sybil pointed a sharp finger at Alara. Kaelin moved faster than the eye could follow. 1 second he was standing still. The next, he was between Sybil and Alara. He let out a snarl that shook the foundations of the building. The guests nearest to them scrambled back, knocking over chairs in their haste to get away. Kaelin unclasped the heavy fur cloak from his shoulders. It was made of black wolf fur and lined with silk. It was a symbol of his office. It was a symbol of his pack. He turned his back on Sybil, dismissing her completely. He draped the heavy cloak around Alara's shivering shoulders. The cloak was massive on her. It swallowed her small frame, pooling on the floor. It was warm, and it smelled overwhelmingly of him, forests, rain, and power. He pulled the hood up over her head, hiding her messy hair and her tear-stained face from the prying eyes of the crowd. "She is not an Omega," Kaelin announced. His voice was calm now, but it was the calm before a storm. He addressed the entire room. "You were all too blind to see it. Her wolf was not absent. It was sleeping, waiting." He placed a hand on Alara's shoulder. "The aura she showed tonight is gold. Does anyone know what that means?" An old man, the pack elder, stepped forward from the crowd. He was leaning on a cane, his eyes wide with wonder. "Gold. It is the mark of the moon wolf, the rarest of all shifters, direct descendants of the first pack." "Correct," Kaelin said. "She is royalty by blood, and you treated her like a slave." Kaelin's eyes swept over the room, making every person who had thrown food or laughed at Alara shrink back in shame and fear. "And there is one more thing," Kaelin added. He looked down at Alara. She looked up at him from under the giant hood, her eyes wide and brown, swimming with confusion. "Mine," he whispered to her. Then he shouted it to the room. "She is my true mate." The shockwave was instant. Mate? The king found his mate? The Omega is the queen? Sybil let out a sound that was half scream, half sob. She grabbed a wine bottle from a nearby table and smashed it against the wall. "No, it's a lie. It's not fair. It should be me." 2 guards finally moved, rushing to restrain Sybil as she began to tear at her own hair in a fit of rage. Kaelin ignored the chaos. He didn't care about Sybil's tantrum. He didn't care about the whispering guests. He bent down and swept Alara up into his arms. Alara gasped, instinctively wrapping her arms around his neck to steady herself. He held her effortlessly, as if she weighed nothing more than a feather. His chest was hard and warm against her cheek. "Hold on," he murmured against her ear. He turned and began to walk toward the exit. The crowd bowed. This time, they didn't bow out of fear alone. They bowed out of respect. They were bowing to their new queen. Alara rested her head against his shoulder. For the first time in her life, she felt safe. The smell of the wine and the noise of the party faded away. All she could smell was him. As they reached the heavy oak doors of the grand hall, Kaelin kicked them open. The cool night air rushed in, greeting them. The full moon hung high in the sky, big and bright. Kaelin paused on the steps of the pack house. He looked down at the woman in his arms. "I have waited 100 years for you," he said softly. "I will not let anyone hurt you ever again." Alara looked at him, her heart beating a new rhythm. "Where are we going?" she whispered. "Home," Kaelin replied. He stepped out into the night, carrying her away from her prison and into her new life. Behind them, Inside the hall, Lady Sybil's screams of rage were finally cut off as the heavy doors slammed shut. The journey from the grand hall to the king's private wing was a blur of shadows and stone. Alara buried her face in the fur of King Kaelin's cloak, listening to the steady, powerful rhythm of his heart. It was a comforting sound, like a war drum that had decided to play a lullaby just for her. He carried her through corridors she had only ever scrubbed on her hands and knees. Usually, she kept her eyes on the floor, counting the cracks in the stones. But now, she was floating above them. They passed a group of servants huddled in a hallway. These were the same women who had tripped Alara in the laundry room yesterday. They had laughed when she burned her hand on the iron. Now, as they saw the king approaching with Alara in his arms, they pressed themselves flat against the wall. Their faces were pale, their eyes wide with terror. They didn't dare breathe until the king had passed. Kaelin didn't even look at them. To him, they didn't exist. All his attention was focused on the small, trembling bundle in his arms. He stopped in front of a set of double doors carved from black oak. 2 elite guards bowed low and pushed the doors open. Kaelin stepped inside and kicked the door shut behind him with his heel. The noise of the outside world, the gossip, the fear, the music vanished instantly. The king's chambers were massive. A fireplace large enough to roast a whole deer dominated one wall, the flames casting a warm orange glow over the room. The floors were covered in thick, dark furs that looked softer than clouds. There was a massive 4-poster bed, draped in black silk, and a balcony that looked out over the moonlit forest. It smelled like him here, cedarwood, rain, and safety. Kaelin walked over to a velvet armchair near the fire and gently set Alara down. She sank into the cushion, feeling small and out of place. She pulled the large cloak tighter around herself, hiding her dirty dress. "Stay," Kaelin said softly. He turned and walked toward a side door. Alara watched him, her heart still racing. Was he leaving? Was this a mistake? But a moment later, he returned. He wasn't alone. He was followed by 3 maids, but these weren't the cruel kitchen staff. These were older women, dressed in crisp uniforms, looking nervous but professional. "Prepare a bath," Kaelin ordered. "Use the healing salts, and bring the silver ointment for her hands." "Yes, Your Majesty," the head maid said, curtsying low. They moved quickly. Within minutes, the sound of rushing water filled the room. Steam began to drift from the bathroom, carrying the scent of lavender and eucalyptus. When the bath was ready, the maids turned to Alara. They reached out to help her undress. Alara flinched. She shrank back into the chair, her eyes wide. Old instincts took over. Hands reaching for her usually meant a pinch or a slap. Kaelin saw the fear in her eyes. A low growl vibrated in his chest, not at her, but at the world that had made her so scared. "Leave us," Kaelin commanded. The maids froze. "But, Your Majesty, she needs help washing." "I said leave." The maids didn't argue. They bowed and scurried out of the room, closing the heavy door behind them. Now, they were alone again. Kaelin walked over to the chair. He knelt on one knee, just as he had in the hall. He lowered himself so he was looking up at her, making himself smaller to show he wasn't a threat. "Alara," he said, his voice deep and rough like velvet, "no one will hurt you here. You are not a servant in this room. You are my equal." Alara looked at him, searching his golden eyes for any sign of a lie. She found none. "Why?" she whispered, her voice cracking. "I am nobody. I have nothing. Why would the Alpha King want an Omega?" Kaelin sighed, a sound that seemed to carry the weight of a century. He reached out and gently unclasped the cloak from her shoulders. "Do you know how old I am, Alara?" She shook her head. I have walked this earth for 112 years, Kaelin said. I have conquered kingdoms. I have fought wars. I have more gold than I can count. But my wolf has been alone. Silence. That is all I have heard for a century. Silence and cold. He gently took her injured hand. He dipped a cloth into a bowl of warm water and began to wipe away the dried blood. His touch was incredibly precise. They call me the cursed king, he continued, his eyes focused on cleaning her wound. They said the moon goddess forgot me. Every year, at the feast, I sit in that chair and watch the females parade in front of me. They want my crown. They want my power. None of them wanted me. He looked up, locking eyes with her. But tonight, you danced. And for the first time in 100 years, the silence broke. My heart started to beat. You are not nobody, Elara. You are the other half of my soul. Elara felt a tear roll down her cheek. She had spent her whole life thinking she was a mistake. Hearing him say she was needed, that she was the missing piece of a king, was overwhelming. Now, Kaelin stood up and offered her his hand. Let's get you out of these rags. A queen should not wear gray wool. He led her to the bathroom. It was made of black marble and gold. The tub was sunken into the floor, filled with steaming water that smelled of flowers. He didn't wash her himself. He gave her privacy, standing guard outside the door with his back turned, respecting her modesty. But he stayed close enough that she knew he was there. Elara sank into the hot water. It stung her cuts at first, but then the healing salts began to work. She scrubbed her skin until it was pink. She washed the grease and ash from her hair. She watched the dirt swirl down the drain, and she felt like she was washing away her old life. When she stepped out, she found a robe made of white silk waiting for her. It was soft and light, feeling like water against her skin. She walked back into the bedroom. Kaelin was waiting by the window. He turned when she entered, and his breath hitched. Clean, warm, and dressed in silk, Elara looked transformed. Her skin glowed in the firelight. Her long brown hair, now clean and drying in soft waves, framed a face that was delicate and lovely. She didn't look like the servant girl anymore. She looked like a moonbeam caught in a jar. Kaelin walked over to her. He reached out and touched a lock of her damp hair. Beautiful, he murmured. He led her to a tall mirror in the corner of the room. Elara looked at her reflection. For a moment, she didn't recognize the girl staring back. She stood straighter. The haunted look in her eyes was fading, replaced by a spark of hope. Is that really me? She asked softly. Kaelin stood behind her, his dark frame towering over her. He placed his hands on her shoulders. In the mirror, they looked like night and day, shadow and light, perfect opposites. That is you, Kaelin said. And tomorrow, the whole world will see you as I do. He turned her around to face him. Rest now, my moon wolf. Tomorrow will be difficult. The pack does not like change. But you do not have to be afraid. I will be the teeth that protect you. He led her to the massive bed. He didn't try to sleep with her, it was too soon. He simply tucked her in under the heavy down comforter. He sat in the chair by the fire, watching over her as she slept, a silent guardian in the dark. For the first time in 10 years, Elara slept without nightmares. The next morning, the sun rose over the silver moon territory, bathing the castle in golden light. But the atmosphere inside was far from sunny. The packhouse was buzzing with gossip. Did you hear? The king took the Omega to his chambers. Is it true she has a golden aura? It must be a trick. A servant can't be a queen. Elara woke up to the smell of fresh pastries and coffee. The nightmare of the cold attic was gone. She stretched her limbs in the massive bed, feeling the silk sheets against her skin. Her peace didn't last long. The day's schedule was set. It was tradition that the day after the feast, the king hosted a garden party. It was a high-tea event, very formal, very elegant, and very public. Kaelin had duties with the Council of Elders in the morning, so Alara had to be prepared by the staff. This time, the maids were terrified of making a mistake. They dressed her in a gown of pale blue chiffon that floated around her ankles. They brushed her hair until it shone like polished mahogany. They put a simple silver necklace around her neck. She looked like a princess, but she felt like an imposter. When she walked out into the royal gardens, the chatter stopped. The gardens were breathtaking. Roses of every color bloomed in neat rows. White tables were set up on the green lawn, laden with tiny sandwiches, cakes, and tea. The sun was shining, birds were singing, but the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. 300 wolves turned to look at Alara. Their eyes weren't kind. They were judging. They were waiting for her to trip. They were waiting for her to use the wrong fork. They wanted proof that she didn't belong. Alara kept her chin up, remembering Kaelin's words. "You are my equal." She walked to the head table. Kaelin wasn't there yet. He was running late from his meeting. That left Alara exposed. She sat down, trying to make herself small. A few brave souls came up to bow stiffly, but most kept their distance. Then, a shadow fell over her table. Well, well, don't you look clean?" Alara looked up. Standing there was Lady Sybil. Sybil looked perfect, as always. She was wearing a tight green dress that showed off her figure. Her blonde hair was piled high on her head in an intricate style, but her eyes were cold, hard chips of ice. However, Sybil wasn't screaming today. She was smiling. It was a tight, plastic smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Lady Sybil," Alara said, her voice steady. She gripped the napkin in her lap to stop her hands from shaking. "Please, don't get up," Sybil said, waving a hand dismissively. She pulled out a chair and sat down next to Alara, invading her personal space. "I wanted to apologize for last night. I was emotional. The wine, you know." Alara didn't buy it. Sybil had tortured her for years. A change of clothes didn't change a person's heart. "It is forgotten," Alara said politely, using a phrase she had heard the nobles use. "Good," Sybil purred. She leaned in closer, dropping her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "Look, Alara. Can I call you Alara? We need to be honest. You're in a dangerous position." "What do you mean?" Alara asked. "The king. He is intense," Sybil said, feigning concern. "He is an alpha of the old blood. He needs a strong mate. A mate with stamina. A mate with power." Sybil looked Alara up and down with pity. "You are lovely, dear. But you are frail. You've been malnourished for years. If you try to keep up with him, his wolf might accidentally hurt you." Alara felt a seed of doubt planted in her chest. Sybil was right about one thing: Alara was physically weak compared to the warrior wolves. "I will get stronger," Alara said defensively. "Of course you will," Sybil smiled. "But you need help. You need a boost." Sybil reached into her small, beaded purse. She pulled out a small, ornate crystal vial. The liquid inside was a deep, shimmering purple. It looked beautiful, like liquid amethyst. "This is a family recipe," Sybil lied smoothly. "It's a tonic made from the elderberries of the north. It boosts your aura. It strengthens your blood. All the highborn ladies drink it before their mating ceremonies to ensure they are strong enough for their alphas." Sybil uncorked the vial. A sweet, sugary scent wafted out. "Here," Sybil said, pushing the vial toward Alara. Drink it. Consider it a peace offering. It will make you strong enough to stand by King Kalen's side. Unless you want him to think you're weak? Elara looked at the vial. She looked at the guests, watching them from the corners of their eyes. She didn't want to be weak. She wanted Kalen to be proud of her. She reached out and took the vial. The glass was cool in her hand. "Thank you," Elara whispered. She raised the vial to her lips. Sybil's eyes glittered with triumph. She held her breath, watching the purple liquid tilt toward Elara's mouth. Elara parted her lips. The liquid touched her tongue. "Stop." It was a voice in her head. Her wolf. Suddenly, Elara's senses slammed into high gear. The moon wolf power that Kalen had spoken of wasn't just about dancing. It was about instinct. It was about truth. As the liquid got closer to her nose, the sugary smell vanished. Underneath the sweetness, there was something else. It smelled sharp, bitter, metallic. It smelled like the time a rat had died under the floorboards in the kitchen. It smelled like wolfsbane. Wolfsbane was deadly to shifters. A small dose would make them sick. A dose this size would stop her heart in minutes. Elara's eyes snapped open. The world seemed to slow down. She looked at the purple liquid. She looked at Sybil's face. She saw the tiny beads of sweat on Sybil's upper lip. She saw the way Sybil's pupils were dilated with excitement. She saw the malice hidden behind the smile. "She is trying to kill me," Elara realized. "Right here, in front of everyone." Elara lowered the vial slowly. Sybil's smile faltered. "What's wrong? Drink it. It's sweet." "It smells strange," Elara said, her voice turning cold. "Don't be silly," Sybil laughed nervously. "It's just herbs. Drink it, quickly, before the king arrives. You want to surprise him with your strength, don't you?" Sybil reached out, trying to push Elara's hand up, trying to force the bottle to her lips. "Drink it, you stupid girl," Sybil hissed, her mask slipping. "Know your place." Elara didn't drink. Instead, she stood up. She slammed the vial down onto the table. It didn't break, but the sound made the silverware jump. "Do you think I am stupid?" Elara said. Her voice wasn't a whisper anymore. It was loud. It carried across the garden. The chatter in the garden stopped instantly. "I beg your pardon?" Sybil stood up, looking offended. "I am trying to help you." "You are trying to poison me," Elara declared. Gasps rippled through the crowd. "Liar!" Sybil shrieked. "How dare you accuse me? I am a lady of the silver moon. You are nothing but a scrub rat." "If it is a tonic," Elara said, pointing at the vial, "then you drink it." Sybil froze. Her face went pale. I don't need it," Sybil stammered. "I am already strong." "Drink it," Elara challenged, stepping closer. The blue chiffon dress swirled around her. She didn't look frail now. She looked dangerous. Sybil panicked. She realized her plan was failing. Rage took over her logic. She couldn't let this servant humiliate her twice. "You ungrateful little wretch," Sybil screamed. Sybil lunged. She shifted her hand into a claw and swiped at Elara's face, aiming to rip her throat out. But Elara didn't flinch. She felt that strange heat rising in her chest again. The golden aura was waking up, and from the edge of the garden, a roar like thunder shook the ground. King Kalen had arrived. The roar that shook the garden was primal. It was the sound of an alpha king who had just seen his mate threatened. But Kalen was at the far entrance of the garden, too far away to stop Sybil's claws in that split second. Sybil was fast. Her fingers, curled into sharp claws, slashed through the air, aiming for Elara's face. "Die, you rat!" Sybil screamed. Elara didn't have time to think. She didn't have time to run. She only had time to feel. That strange, warm sun that lived in her chest, the golden aura, exploded. It wasn't a conscious choice. It was a reflex, like blinking when something flies at your eye. Boom. A shockwave of pure golden light erupted from Alara's body. It was hot, like a blast of desert wind. It hit Sybil mid-air. Sybil didn't even touch Alara. The force of the aura slammed into her like a physical wall. Sybil was thrown backward, flying 10 feet through the air. She shrieked as she crashed into a table of refreshments. Crash! Splash! The table collapsed. Cakes, teacups, and pitchers of iced tea went flying. Sybil landed hard in a muddy patch of the lawn, covered in frosting and soaked in tea. She gasped for air, looking shocked and pathetic. Alara stood in the center of the chaos, breathing hard. The golden light swirled around her like a tornado, whipping her hair and her blue dress around her legs. She wasn't hurt. She was glowing. Then the ground rumbled. Kalen was there. He moved so fast, he was a blur of black motion. He didn't stop to check on Alara first. His wolf was in kill mode. He leaped over the broken table and landed on top of Sybil. His hand wrapped around Sybil's throat. He lifted her off the ground as if she were a rag doll. His eyes were no longer human. They were the solid, glowing gold of a wolf on the brink of shifting. "You dare," Kalen snarled, his voice sounding like gravel grinding together. "You dare touch her?" Sybil clawed at his hand, choking. Her face turned purple. Kalen, please." The guards had their swords drawn, surrounding the scene, but no one dared to intervene. The Alpha King was going to snap her neck. "Kalen, stop." The voice cut through the red haze of Kalen's rage. It wasn't a shout. It was a command. Kalen froze. He turned his head slowly. Alara was walking toward him. The golden light around her was fading, but her eyes were fierce. She didn't look scared of him. She looked like a queen calming her king. "Don't kill her," Alara said firmly. Kalen growled low in his throat. "She tried to hurt you. The punishment is death." "If you kill her now," Alara said, stepping closer until she could put a hand on his tense arm. "It's too easy. She wants to be a martyr. She wants people to say the king went mad for a servant." Alara looked down at Sybil, who was dangling from Kalen's grip, gasping for air. "Let her go," Alara said. Kalen hesitated. His muscles were locked tight, but the touch of Alara's hand on his arm sent a wave of calm through him. He trusted her. He opened his hand. Sybil dropped to the muddy grass, coughing and sputtering. She looked up, her eyes full of hate. You witch! You attacked me. I was just offering you a drink." Sybil pointed a shaking finger at the vial that was still sitting on the table where Alara had slammed it down. "I tried to give her a tonic, and she used magic on me," the crowd murmured. Sybil was lying, but she was a good liar. Some of the guests looked confused. Was the king protecting a monster? Alara walked back to the table. She picked up the crystal vial of purple liquid. "A tonic?" Alara asked, loud enough for everyone to hear. "To make me strong?" "Yes," Sybil cried, wiping mud from her face. "It's elderberry." "Then let's test it," Alara said calmly. She uncorked the vial. She didn't drink it. Instead, she poured the contents onto a beautiful white rose bush growing in a nearby pot. The moment the purple liquid touched the flowers, a hissing sound filled the air. Smoke rose from the plant. In seconds, the white roses turned black. The green leaves withered and curled into ash. The plant died instantly, consumed by the acid in the poison. The silence in the garden was absolute. The guests stared at the dead plant in horror. Alara dropped the empty vial onto the grass. It made a soft thud. Wolfsbane, Alara said cold, looking at Sybil. Concentrated. If I had drunk that, I would be dead before I hit the ground. The crowd gasped. The murmurs turned into angry shouts. Trying to kill a guest was bad. Trying to poison the king's mate was treason. Kalen stared at the dead plant. His face went completely blank, which was more terrifying than his anger. He turned to look at Sybil's father, Alpha Thorn, who was standing in the crowd, looking pale and sick. Alpha Thorn, Kalen said softly. Did you know about this? No, Your Majesty. Thorn fell to his knees, trembling. I swear, she acts alone. She is foolish and jealous. Kalen looked down at Sybil. She was no longer screaming. She was curled in a ball in the mud, sobbing, realizing her life was over. I will not kill you, Sybil, Kalen announced. Death is too quick for a traitor. He raised his voice, so the decree reached the castle walls. I strip you of your rank. You are no longer a lady. You are no longer an alpha. From this day forward, you are an omega. You will scrub the floors. You will wash the linens. You will eat the scraps left by the others. Sybil wailed, a sound of pure despair. To a high-born wolf, becoming a servant was a fate worse than death. And if you ever look at my queen again, Kalen added, his voice dropping to a whisper that carried on the wind, I will not be so merciful. Guards, Kalen snapped. Get this filth out of my garden. 2 guards dragged the screaming Sybil away. Kalen turned back to Alara. The rage vanished from his eyes, replaced by concern. He took her hands, checking them for injuries. Are you hurt? He asked frantically. Did the aura burn you? I'm fine, Alara said, though her knees felt a little weak now that the adrenaline was fading. I didn't know I could do that. Kalen smiled, a rare, genuine smile that made him look younger. I told you, Alara, you are powerful. He kissed her forehead. Then he turned to face the stunned crowd. The party was over, but the truth was just beginning. The garden was quiet. The waiters were cleaning up the mess Sybil had made. The guests were standing in awkward clumps, unsure if they should leave or stay. They looked at Alara with a mixture of fear and awe. She wasn't just the Omega anymore. She was the woman who had blasted a high-born lady across the room with golden light. Your Majesty, a raspy voice broke the silence. It was the pack elder, a wolf named Orion. He was over 80 years old, with white hair and skin like wrinkled parchment. He leaned heavily on a wooden staff carved with runic symbols. Kalen nodded respectfully. Elder Orion. Orion didn't look at the king. He was staring intently at Alara. His milky eyes were wide, filled with tears. May I see your hand, child? Orion asked, his voice trembling. Alara looked at Kalen. He nodded encouragingly. She stepped forward and offered her hand to the old man. Orion didn't kiss her hand. He turned it over. He pointed to a small birthmark on the inside of her wrist. It was faint, shaped like a crescent moon with a star in the center. I haven't seen this mark in 20 years, Orion whispered. He looked up at Alara's face, really seeing her for the first time. You have your mother's eyes, but you have your father's chin. Alara frowned. My parents were nobodies. They were rogues who died in a fire. That is the lie they told to protect you, Orion said, shaking his head. He turned to the crowd, tapping his staff on the stone path to get everyone's attention. Does anyone remember the Sunfire Pack? Orion asked loudly. A murmur went through the older guests. The Sunfire Pack? Abeta asked. They were the strongest pack in the south. They were destroyed by hunters 2 decades ago. Everyone died. Not everyone, Orion said. His voice became stronger. The Alpha and Luna of the Sunfire Pack had a baby girl. On the night the hunters attacked, they knew they couldn't save themselves, so they bound their daughter's powers with a spell to hide her scent. They gave her to a trusted servant to smuggle out. Orion pointed his staff at Alara. The spell broke last night when she danced. The gold aura is the signature of the Sunfire bloodline. They were the descendants of the solar wolves. Orion bowed low, his forehead almost touching the grass. You are not a rogue, child. You are Lady Alara of the Sunfire Pack. You are an alpha by blood and a queen by destiny. The revelation hit the crowd like a lightning bolt. Alara stood frozen. Her whole life, she had been told she was worthless. She had been told her parents abandoned her. They loved me? Alara whispered, tears filling her eyes. They didn't leave me? They died to save you, Orion said gently. Kalen stepped up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist to support her. You see, he murmured in her ear, you were never nothing. You were a hidden treasure. The reality of the situation began to sink in for the rest of the pack. They hadn't just bullied a random servant. They had enslaved and abused the lost heir of a fallen kingdom. The mood in the garden shifted from shock to shame. One by one, the wolves began to kneel. The headmaid, who had made Alara scrub floors with a toothbrush, fell to her knees, weeping. The guards who had laughed when she tripped dropped their spears and bowed their heads to the dirt. Alphathorn, Sybil's father, was already on the ground, forehead pressed to the grass. Soon, the entire garden was a sea of kneeling wolves. The only people standing were Kalen and Alara. We beg for your forgiveness, my queen, someone shouted from the back. Please, have mercy on us, another cried. Alara looked out at the sea of bowed heads. These were the people who had made her life a living hell. She could punish them. She could have them all whipped. She could banish them. Kalen would do it if she asked. He was waiting for her command. She felt the anger rise in her chest. But then, she remembered her mother's voice from her dream. Listen to the earth. A true alpha doesn't rule with fear. A true alpha rules with balance. Alara took a deep breath. She stepped away from Kalen's embrace and stood tall. Stand up, she commanded. Her voice was clear and steady. The wolves hesitated, terrified. I said, stand up. Slowly, shakily, the guests rose to their feet. They couldn't meet her eyes. You treated me like dirt because you thought I was weak, Alara said. You judged me by the clothes I wore and the job I did. That is not the way of the Silver Moon Pack. Not anymore. She looked at the headmaid. I will not punish you for the past, but things will change. From now on, no Omega will be treated with cruelty. Every wolf, from the kitchen to the throne, will be treated with respect. If I see anyone bullying another, they will answer to me. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. I forgive you, Alara said, but I will never forget. Earn my trust back. A silence followed, but it wasn't awkward. It was relieved. Long live Queen Alara, Orion shouted, raising his staff. Long live the Queen, the crowd roared back. It was deafening. This time, they weren't chanting to mock her. They were cheering for her. Kalen looked at his mate, his chest swelling with pride. She hadn't just dazzled him with a dance. She had just conquered his entire kingdom with a few sentences. She was perfect. 3 days later, the grand hall was transformed. The broken glass was gone. the smell of stale wine was replaced by the scent of thousands of white lilies and moonflowers. Golden banners hung from the ceiling, displaying the crest of the silver moon pack intertwined with the sun symbol of Alara's lost family. It was the night of the mating ceremony. The hall was packed, but the vibe was completely different from the feast. There was no fear. There was laughter, music, and a sense of unity. The pack felt lighter, as if a dark cloud had been lifted. At the front of the hall, Alara stood waiting. She wasn't wearing gray wool. She wasn't wearing the simple blue dress. She was wearing a gown of pure gold. It was fitted at the waist and flowed out like liquid metal. The bodice was encrusted with diamonds that sparkled under the chandelier lights. On her head sat a delicate crown made of woven gold and moonstones. She looked breathtaking. The heavy wooden doors opened. The music swelled, a triumphant, orchestral version of the haunting melody she had hummed during her dance. King Kalen walked in. He was dressed in a formal black military uniform, with gold braiding. A heavy velvet cape hung from his shoulders. He looked regal, dangerous, and incredibly handsome. He walked down the aisle, his eyes locked on her. He didn't see the crowd. He didn't see the decorations. He only saw her. When he reached the dais, he didn't sit on his throne. He stopped in front of her. The ceremony was short and ancient. They exchanged vows of loyalty and protection. They bit into a ceremonial fruit, sharing the juice to symbolize sharing a life. When the priest declared them mated for eternity, a cheer erupted that shook the stained glass windows. But Kalen raised a hand for silence. He turned to the musicians. "Play the song," he ordered. The musicians shifted their tune. The drums began a slow, rhythmic beat. Boom, boom. It was the same rhythm Alara had danced to on that terrible night. But now, it didn't sound sad. It sounded powerful. Kalen turned to Alara and extended his hand. "May I have this dance, my queen?" he asked, a playful glint in his golden eyes. Alara smiled, placing her hand in his. "I thought I only danced for you?" "Exactly," Kalen grinned. "The room is full, but I only see you." He pulled her close. His hand rested on her waist, possessive and warm. They began to move. It wasn't a stiff ballroom waltz. They moved with the wild, ancient rhythm of the wolf. They spun together, a blur of black and gold. Alara laughed as he lifted her into the air. She felt light. She felt free. As they danced, the magic happened again. Alara's golden aura began to glow, soft and warm. But this time, Kalen's aura joined hers. His was a deep, midnight blue mixed with silver. The two lights twisted together in the air, winding around each other like vines. They merged, creating a blindingly beautiful column of light that shot up toward the ceiling. The guests watched in stunned silence. It was a visible sign of the perfect mate bond. It was a blessing from the moon goddess herself. Kalen slowed the dance, pulling Alara flush against his chest. He lowered his head until his lips were brushing her ear. "You know," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "When I saw you on this floor 3 days ago, covered in wine and rags, I thought you were the most beautiful thing I had ever seen." Alara looked up at him, her eyes shining with love. "And now?" Kalen looked at her crown, her golden dress, and the confident smile on her face. "You dazzled me then," Kalen promised, leaning in to kiss her. "And you dazzle me now. You will dazzle me for the rest of our lives." He kissed her deeply. The crowd erupted into cheers, flowers raining down on them. Outside, the full moon shone brighter than it ever had before. Inside, the king and his queen howled together, a sound of joy, marking the beginning of a golden age for the Silver Moon Pack.